Hello, my name is Fred. I'm the host of PPC Town Hall. I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Optmyzr. Thank you for joining us for another episode. And this time we have two great panelists who are going to come and talk to us about a new persona. It's called the Workday consumer. Obviously, a lot of things have changed in the world in the past couple of years. And how has that changed how people behave, consumers behave when they're online doing research and potentially looking to buy the thing that it is you saw? So we have some great updates we're going to hear about. And then we're also going to hear about how you take those new insights, those new findings, and how you act on them and how you target these new personas that we've discovered. So welcome to another episode of PPC Town Hall. All right, let's bring in my two guests today. So we have John Lee from Microsoft and Melissa Mackey from Merkle B2B. Welcome to you both.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great to be here, Fred.
Melissa, longtime viewer, longtime PPC industry expert. I can't believe it's taken us until now to finally get you on the show.
I know, I'm super excited.
Yeah. Hey, tell people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I've done PPC since 2002. Started in-house and then went agency side, and I've been with I've been with Merkle B2B since Gyro, the agency that I worked at for 10 years, was acquired by Merkle. So I've done B2B for 10 years. So I'm super excited to be here to talk about that.
Nice. And I know we got lots of people viewing who can't wait to hear B2B tips. We're always talking about e-commerce and consumer, and it's like, hey, let's talk about how we get those big deals, right? The ones that take forever to close.
Absolutely.
John, good to have you back. I can't remember if you've done one of these, but I know you have given keynotes at our user conference. So certainly people who know about Optmyzr are no stranger to you. But remind people, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, well, hi, I'm John Lee, head of evangelism for Microsoft Advertising. That is an ambiguous title, but it means I get to be here talking to all of you today at the very least. And I've been on the town hall a couple times. I think I was on a career panel at one time. And I know at one point I got to show off my Surface Duo for you and David Satella. So we've been on the show a couple of times.
Yeah, that was one of the really early ones. You're right. Well, it's great to have you back for the third time. I lose count. I'm sorry. But good. So yeah, I mean, like one of these things that's been happening, I think it was who's talking about this, but basically saying that consumers no longer go shopping. And it was kind of like this statement that's very contentious, like consumers don't go shopping. Like, what do you mean? But the point was consumers no longer go shopping as an event. They are constantly shopping on their mobile devices. And there's another shift that Microsoft has looked at, which is how consumers behave when they're researching stuff for personal use. That no longer seems to just happen in the home setting anymore, right? Or on their personal device, but it's kind of shifted. So John, what are we talking about here with that?
Yeah, we're talking about the Workday consumer. And so I'm going to talk and share at the same time. Hopefully we get this right.
Yeah, so you, Microsoft's on that research on the Workday consumer, and that's what we're talking about here, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So let's look at the last 2 years, right? There's been a lot of change with the pandemic, and the bottom line is that the way that we work and live has gone through transformation, where the digitization, quote unquote, of our lives has rapidly accelerated. So now, as advertisers, right, on the flip side of this, again, there's been a rush, right, over the past 2 years to say, okay, what's happening with these changes? What's happening with these emerging targets, as it were? And so, seeing the swell of e-commerce, people buying everything online. We thought e-commerce was big before the pandemic, but who buddy? We saw a massive change in that. But it's not just e-commerce; it's all sorts of consumer decisions and journeys, and these are all flipped upside down due to the merging of work and life. And so that led us at Microsoft Advertising to wonder: is there a new consumer journey? and our advertisers actually adapting to this new journey. And so that's why we set out to do some research with a partner, Forrester Consulting. We talked with over 5,000 consumers and over 1,300 advertising executives globally to really get to the crux of what's been happening. Not to put too fine a point on it. So, not so long ago, from Monday through Friday, consumers went to offices where they were engaged in work life activities, and then they went home and immersed themselves in personal life activities. And there was some blending of that, but it was minimal at best. Then the pandemic hit, right? And that line became extremely blurred. And so what's been really surprising here is that of those surveyed in this research, almost 60% of these people consider their work and personal tasks of equal importance during work time. Underscore that last part, right? Work and personal tasks are of equal importance during work time. That's a massive shift in consumer thinking. And the most profound outcome of this, as we say, innovation of life, is that it disrupted the well-planned consumer decision journey as we know it. And so 62% of our respondents are regularly researching, proper grammar there, researching and purchasing products and services during work time. So again, I'll underscore products, e-commerce, and services as we think about that B2B side of things.
Let me ask you a question about that.
Yeah.
So my question is, you're talking about work time here a lot, right? But do you think that the pandemic has changed what it means? What is work time? Is that still 9 to 5 or something like it?
So when we reference work time here, we're talking about the historical assumption, right, of that working 9 to 5, right?
Come on,
that's the working assumption, but right, that has blurred, right? So not only are behaviors different, I won't say post-pandemic because we're not completely out of the pandemic, but behaviors are different, but that also means that work time has shifted as well. I think that most employers are still going to say, on average, generally log in 9 to 5, but I mean, I'll speak for myself, and that is, sometimes I work early in the morning and less so in the late afternoon, right? And kind of juggle that schedule around. And that's something that is very different, and I know that I'm not alone in that.
And Melissa, what does that look like for you at Merkle?
Well, work time kind of almost doesn't exist anymore. It's almost like there's core hours where from probably 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. most people are working, but it varies so much, and because people are working from home, the work day really stretches out to include just about anything from 6 o'clock in the morning to midnight, and sometimes beyond that.
Yeah, and then it depends on your time zone too, right? So
absolutely, yeah, it absolutely does.
Good. But yeah, thanks for clarifying that a bit, John. So yeah, you were saying that there's this huge shift, right? So continue on that.
Yeah, and then what is worth pointing out here is that we looked at both the changing behaviors, right, this emerging behavior shift, but also being that we are marketers working with marketers, thinking through, okay, are advertisers and marketers responding to this change? And what we learned is that 57% of brand decision makers are rating their companies as intermediates or novices at using the right combination of tactics to target each consumer persona, and that be that the Workday consumer or any other, right? And so that's a very broad statement to say intermediate or novice. That was a surprise, to say the least.
Yeah.
But when we think about this Workday consumer and people that are seamlessly going from I'm working right now, but I'm going to take a quick pause. I'm going to jump on to Bing, or I'm going to jump onto Google and do some quick research before I go back to my next project. What exactly are people researching? And so we see travel, clothing and apparel, sporting goods, electronics and tools, round out the top 5 in terms of research categories. But then when we think actual purchase, a little bit of a different story. We see media come up at the top of the list, followed by travel, financial services, general tools. So think software and things like that, and then hotels. So travel, kind of showing up twice in the actual purchased category.
And I'm a little curious here, and Melissa, I'd love to hear from you too, but stuff like travel, I mean, listen, the average consumer has not bought that by going to a travel agency in 2 decades. But something like clothes and sporting goods, yeah, I mean, we used to go to Macy's, we used to go to Dick's Sporting Goods, and then the pandemic made that really challenging because they were closed. But now it seems like we can do both, right? So we can go online or we can go back to the store. It seems like a lot of people are going back to the stores. Based on the timing of this analysis and research that you did, like, do you think this is going to go back the other way, or this is like continuing, going to continue even though people go back to stores?
So that's a great question. So, store activity is certainly picking up. But what we're seeing is that the research, right? So the research is still happening in a big way online. And when we think about the overall consumer journey, or the CDJ, right, the customer decision journey, the research elements are still happening in bulk online, whether or not the in purchase is online or in store.
Right. And to maybe validate that point that you just made, then stuff like clothes and sporting goods are high in the research bucket, but not the top 5 in actual purchases. So it's
correct.
Online research leading to offline purchases.
Which is absolutely important in all of this. And, I think an important question to ask ourselves is, people have been doing online research for a very long time, as you eloquently pointed out. But what is the key differentiator here? And kind of the underscore of all of this is how the quote unquote Workday consumer operates. And that is, before it was different devices, right? You've got your phone, you've got your iPad, you've got your work computer, maybe even your personal computer, and there's some interchange between those devices through the course of the day. Your work day was on that work machine, but then in your personal time, and now I'm on my phone, now I'm on my tablet. With the Workday consumer, what we've seen is that people are switching back and forth so quickly that they're staying on one device. And there's been an upswell in the use of the work PC. And so that's one area where it's worth calling out, because that's a big difference. So yes, people were doing research and all of these things before, and maybe cutting out through the course of the workday, maybe to do some of that. But it's that behavior change that is inclusive of device even. And so mobile, of course, is still massively important, but the PC has I wouldn't say it's made a comeback, because it never went anywhere, but usage trends on PCs have seen a massive increase over the last 2 years.
I was talking to my dad yesterday, and I was like, hey, I just bought a Windows machine. And he was like, what do you mean? Is it something that cleans Windows? And I was like, no. And then he's like, oh, you mean a PC? And I'm like, yeah, I meant a PC. But yes, I'm back with a PC.
That's brilliant.
Well, I would say too that we've lost the commute, right? So a lot of people used to commute, and if you were on public transportation, you were on your phone researching whatever. We saw that a lot in B2B, where especially executives would be doing research during their commuting time. Nobody's commuting. So why would you sit there on your little phone, a small screen, when you could sit down in front of your PC at your desk that's 5 steps away from where you just had your morning coffee? So I think that's having an impact too.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But that said, I mean, we still live in a mobile first world. I don't think that's changing, right? It's just that given the choice, you can now use both equally. Yeah.
Just a matter of not discounting one or the other, right?
Exactly.
And then the other interesting thing is the measurement across devices. So John, you were talking about how people hop from one device to another and back and forth throughout the day. That's historically been somewhat challenging to measure. So, and especially then in B2B, where we already deal with such long sales cycles, if you lose the connection, the person did research, upper funnel, these keywords, and then they came in and maybe they filled out my lead gen form, but that was on a desktop, and now you don't know what that original mobile search was. So has that been getting easier?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a little easier. For one thing, you don't have people in different locations. It's all taking place from the same home, the same IP address. A lot of people are logged in if they're using their computer, their work computer for personal activities, they're logged into their personal accounts more frequently than they may have been, pre-pandemic when they were just logged into a business account, which has always been the challenge, right? Companies have work addresses for folks, but they don't have personal addresses. But now we're able to do a little bit more in the way of retargeting and things because people are logged in on the same machine more than they were before at the same location.
So I suppose that's the pro. So the attribution becomes easier, the retargeting becomes easier. But do you lose any element of being able to identify who's a B2B prospect because they used to be on a work machine, but now maybe they aren't so much anymore?
It's difficult also matching up those locations. We used to do a lot of IP targeting based on, where the business was located. Well, that's meaningless now. IP targeting is a thing of the past for sure.
Wow, that's
the distributed workforce, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Huh. So you fully say it's a thing of the past. You don't think there's gonna be core people in the office a couple days a week?
We're not seeing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not seeing it with our own employees. They opened up the offices and said, we're capped at 50%. And I think we're at about 10%.
Oh, wow.
People just are not embracing going back to the office. And I believe that's the case widespread.
Well, and that speaks to this idea of the hybrid workplace, right? So I'm an exception to the rule. I've been work from home for a very long time. I think I'm going on 12 years as a work from home entity. So take me out of the equation, but Microsoft as a whole has moved towards what we call a hybrid workplace. And that means that, a couple days in the office, a couple days at home every week, and that's going to change. And so to your point, Melissa, that makes IP targeting next to impossible. Yeah, you're going to catch some of those people when they're at the office, but you don't know who they are. You don't know when they're going to be at the office, what day, and then those days that they're at home, it's a completely different story. And I know that the idea of the hybrid workplace is bigger than just Microsoft, right? There's a lot of businesses that are adapting and adopting to similar strategies.
Yeah, all of Dentsu is that way.
But I suppose, with IP targeting, even if you're not maybe getting the volume you did before, because only 10% of people in this case are working from the office, those 10% of people, if they're at the right IP, looking for the right keywords, you still want those, right? Because it is more specific than finding those distributed workforce people.
Exactly. Well, and if people are using a VPN through their office, then you can kind of get around it with that. But not everybody does. It's amazing. I would say most people don't bother logging into their VPN, even though they're supposed to.
All right. So let's teach people how to be more secure, and then we can again do B2B marketing to them. But good. So, John, very interesting research on the Workday consumer. What do you do with this? Now that we know people are doing personal stuff on their work computers, how do we target?
I'll riff on a couple of things first off, and that would be one, we already talked about devices, and so making sure that your targeting is inclusive of all device types. And so I think we're mostly talking about mobile and desktop laptops, but tablets are still a thing. We don't want to dismiss those, even though they are on a decline, at least from a sales perspective. And so devices notwithstanding, we also need to be considerate of I've mentioned it a dozen times already, and that's the consumer journey or the customer decision journey. And that's device, of course, but it's also inclusive of channels. And so, what we've seen in our research and what we can see in the data is that people are using multiple search engines, right? It's not just Google, it's not just Bing. People are using and referencing multiple touch points And so this is where display and native advertising come into play, and the retargeting that Melissa mentioned a minute ago. All of these play a role in making sure that you are getting the right level of attention, and that impression share with your target audience, whether that's regardless of industry or vertical. And last but not least would be, and I think you might have touched on it, Frederick, right? And this idea of privacy, teaching people how to be privacy minded. But, I think that, when we think about consumer personas, we really think about how can we be as targeted as possible. And so really, I think we need to be mindful, particularly as we think about what comes next in our industry, right? The future, the cookieless world, et cetera, is this balancing act of personalization and privacy. And I think, honestly, we need to test, see what's going to work best, what's going to fit into the changes that come ahead of us, and make the best of what we can.
Yeah, Melissa, what's your POV on privacy and loss of third-party cookies? Because obviously, I mean, you're a big proponent of audience targeting. So how do we keep that going?
Yeah, advertisers, if you have not gotten your first-party audiences figured out, now is the time. It's past time. Those that are doing it well are going to succeed, and those that were depending on in-market audiences and affinity audiences and topics and all of those, third-party audience targeting options are going to be in a lot of trouble once we, kind of move into this no more third-party cookies. It's really important to get a DMP in place if you don't have one. Figure out some way to segment your first-party audiences. We're seeing it with our own clients. Those that are doing that are really having success and are able to take advantage of everything that the search engines offer, all the native advertising, all the, the multimedia ads that Microsoft has, the, discovery campaigns on Google, because they have this audience in the background. But you really aren't going to succeed with those just trying to layer on, affinity audiences. So now's the time. Get on board, get those built.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about technology stack, what that means. Do people need, I mean, you said DMP was one of them, but does anything else change?
The biggest thing is having some way to connect your audience to the platforms. A DMP is the easiest way to do it. That's a data management platform. So it's something like LiveRamp, or there's a bunch of different ones out there. Where you can just upload you can create audiences on your side and then upload them to the engines and advertise against them. But you could just use lists of emails. It's just a little bit harder to manage. A DMP will help you keep it all straight and up to date, and regularly push those updates so that your audiences don't get outdated.
Right. So that's a way to build your true first-party audience. John touched maybe a little bit on in-market audiences, affinity groups, topics. My understanding on the Google side is that they feel very positive that even though technically the third-party cookie goes away, they are going to be quite good at emulating, sort of like in finding who's who, and not who's who, but like interests, right? So it's no longer like privacy invasive. What's Microsoft's stance on that?
I would say that it's a very similar standpoint, right? Those let's call it, the Microsoft data set isn't going away. And so where we've had in-market audiences, LinkedIn profile targeting, all of these things, none of that is going away. And those data sets are only getting richer, by the day. And so, yeah, I would say it's a very similar standpoint that, yeah, we're moving into this new future, but we still have a ton of data, and we have it locked down in such a way that it is private, right? There's nothing that's coming through that's gonna break the privacy with the end user.
Exactly. But that said, still do what Melissa is advocating. Your first-party data is gold, and too few people have been using that correctly. And that's a really good way to differentiate yourself from your competitors.
Absolutely. I would also say that the LinkedIn targeting for Microsoft is a giant plus, um, because it's so B2B focused. The challenge that we see a lot of times with search engines saying we know who people are is they're not thinking of it through a B2B lens. They're thinking of it through a B2C lens. And so we really struggle with even finding categories that we can target our customers appropriately. LinkedIn makes it really easy. The challenge is just scale, but I think you'll get there. And if people aren't using that, they should be.
And I would say that's, oh, sorry, Frederick.
No, absolutely. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's also an opportunity for creativity, right, Melissa? So on the B2B side, that's not to say that you can't leverage some of those more traditionally B2C in-market audiences, particularly if you're, setting them in as optimization or bid only, right? To see, hey, my assumption of my B2B audience is that they like golf, and you know what I mean, and throw those against the wall, and if they stick, they stick, right? Because as smart marketers, we know some of these things about our potential customers, and so yeah, not to be ignored for sure. But yeah, LinkedIn profile targeting definitely changed the game and continues to do so.
Yep.
Okay, so now we have LinkedIn, we have audiences. Let's get a bit more specific, right? So Melissa, would you have like different audiences for sort of the same prospect? Do you have different messaging? Like tactically, how do you play on this?
Yeah, so different audiences for different stages of the buyer journey based on what actions they took. So, if somebody is brand new to you, you don't know anything about them, then they go into one audience. If they've downloaded a white paper, then they go into a different audience. And these could be the same person going through the journey. If they've taken a demo, then they go into a different audience. If they sign up and become a lead, then they go into an exclusion audience. Exclusion audiences are something that is surprisingly overlooked in B2B. For B2C, we're used to saying, okay, somebody purchased and let's take them out of the funnel. But in B2B, you see people just targeting the website visitors, is showing them the same thing they're showing people who haven't been to the website. Be smart about this. Think about, who the people are. You have data about them. Think about how, what is that person? Where are they in the stage? What's the information they're looking for? It's not hard. You just have to do a little bit of thinking about it. But we tend to think about it as if the person took a particular action, where does that mean they are in the buyer journey and what should they see next?
And so what should they see next? That's a little bit more complicated in the day and age of RSAs, right? So it used to be that we had EXTAs, expanded text ads, or ETAs on Google. Now it's all RSAs, and we give 15 headlines and a bunch of descriptions, and there's much less certainty. How do you work with that?
A lot of pinning. One of the challenges we're having with RSAs, frankly, is asset testing is really hard. You're limited to 3 RSAs. So if you want to test more than 3 assets in an ad group, you can't. You have to do it systematically. That's something that's a little bit different. But if the message has to be very specific, we just use pinning. We're not real fans of RSAs in many cases because it's challenging to make them work for B2B because it's so granular. So it's not like you want a red shirt or a blue shirt or a green shirt. It's very specific.
John, I'm sure you have a different point of view on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I understand the limitations and the frustrations, but I would say there are still some levels of creativity that can be had. And I know on the Microsoft advertising side, we've recently reintroduced keyword insertion, something that we don't necessarily talk about a whole lot these days. Used to be all the rage, right? But that could still be a way to make your RSA assets a little bit more relevant. But it's not just that; it's also location, it's countdowns. I mean, a lot of the things that weren't available for RSAs out of the gate are now there and can help you say, okay, yes, I know I have to test multiple assets, multiple headlines and body copies, but I at least know that regardless of which asset shows, I'm going to be relevant for X or Y. And so I think that there's still some controls that are coming your way. to make it a slightly less painful experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The DKI and the ad customizers are that's a big help for sure.
Mhm.
Fred, you're mute.
I had to blow my nose. Sorry, then I am on mute.
Not allowed.
We're all human. It's okay.
I know. But yeah, one thing we saw in our RSA study was that certainly if you do full-on pinning to make your RSA behave like an ETA, then you're going to get very low impression volume. Is not going to be great. If you go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, you let the engines do whatever they want to do. You get huge impressions, but of course you lose a lot of control. But we did see there was a happy medium, right? So multi-pinning, so pin multiple texts to headline one, so that it's still controlling that, okay, maybe line one needs to show my brand, but there's a couple of variations of how you position your brand. Position two, maybe pinning a couple of calls to action. So that kind of like brought results back in line to a happy medium. So that's one way that we recommend testing things.
Yep, definitely. We've done that as well. Doing a lot of testing with multi-pinning. It's kind of cool. I don't know that a lot of people know you can do that.
Exactly. And that's the problem, right? So in the beginning of RSAs, like you couldn't do anything, like John was saying, and now you can do DKIs and you can do ad customizers and you can do multi-pinning. I don't know if you can do it in Microsoft, but in Google, you can now do ad variations. So you can literally do a proper A/B test of two headlines. You can use an ad variation to test pinning, right? So you don't even have to run two RSAs, but you can run the test within one RSA and get statistically significant results. Yeah, a lot of people, they miss out on like this week's new features in RSAs, and then they just assume that it doesn't do anything. All right, so we've talked about the audiences. We've talked about what to say in the ad. Let's talk about where you want to show these ads. So obviously, the promise and the beauty of search advertising is the intent expressed by the keyword and showing your ad on the search results page. But it goes far beyond that nowadays, right? So there's all types of display ad formats. There's video. There's discovery sort of campaigns. There's shopping ads. So Melissa, talk maybe a little bit about how do you layer these together with audiences?
Yeah, so if you have audiences, all the issues with display, with video, with any kind of the multimedia formats that were particularly problematic, especially for B2B. I mean, display networks can be a Wild West. But if you have an audience that you're advertising against, you know who these people are. You know that they're prospects, that there's somebody that's likely to be interested in your product. You're not going to just be showing your ad to whoever. Now you can actually use those channels very successfully without having to worry about who's seeing my ad. Is it some little kid or is it whoever? So we've seen great success. We've gotten back into display in a big way. We've also gotten into, like I mentioned earlier, discovery campaigns, multimedia campaigns on Microsoft. All of these formats that for many years for B2B were just strictly off limits because there was no way to target the audience appropriately. Now that we have first party audiences, and better targeting even outside of first party audiences, much more accurate and better data that we're getting from it. And bid modifiers and all the things that we have now that we didn't have before. If you haven't tested these things in a while, now is the time to do it because we're seeing phenomenal results even from Google Display for clients who are using them with first party audiences.
John, any take on that?
Well, I know that in my days of managing campaigns, I know that one area that always was a fascination for myself and my team, but something that we found success, and that was, we have our audiences and we've broken them down, particularly when you think B2B, stages of the sales cycle, right? What action have they taken up to this point? And Melissa, I think you painted a pretty picture on that a few minutes ago. But even breaking that down at the keyword level of, if they've already achieved a certain stage, there's likely their search intent is different. And if they're still doing research, they're still kicking the proverbial tires, so to speak, that's a different query than what got them into the funnel in the first place. And so making sure that, even having the granular audiences, but going even more granular with layering that on top of keywords as well, to make sure that we're getting the right people to the right content at the right time.
Yeah, we have all of our keywords bucketed by buyer journey for most of our, at least for our enterprise clients. Broader keywords at the top of the funnel, and then going all the way down to specific and brand at the bottom. That's a generalization, but yeah.
Cool. And Melissa, I have some rapid fire questions for you
Okay.
for the B2B audience. Automated bidding, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. What form?
Whatever is your objective. We've had great results with automated bidding.
Okay. And then as far as objective, how do you communicate your objective and the actual results? Do you do offline conversion imports, enhanced conversions, restating conversions, cheek lids?
All of the above.
All the above?
All of the above. We do a lot of Salesforce importing. The Salesforce plugin to Google is really helpful. A lot of our clients are using Salesforce, but we use G-Clids and Google conversions, Bing conversion, UET. We use all of it.
Okay. Those are my rapid fire. What did I miss? What other B2B tips are like totally key?
Wow, audiences is really the big one, and we've covered that a lot today. That you B2B is tough because you don't know who the person is when they're searching. With social, you know a lot about them, but you don't know if there's any intent. With search, you know what they're searching for, but you don't know if they're looking for a security system. You don't know if it's for their home or for their business. So layering on that audience data and anything you know about them is super important and is going to get you better results. And then you don't have to worry about all these other details like, should I be on mobile or should I use GDN or whatever?
Cool. And John, so with this Workday consumer, where it's kind of like a hybrid of, it's a B2B audience, but they're really doing B2C type of research. Are you guys going to make it easier for us to like pinpoint who's who?
We are indeed. No official announcement to make today, but there's work that's happening as an actual identifiable target for this to come. And so TBD. Okay,
we've identified the problem. Smart people are working on a solution.
That they are. Smarter than me.
Awesome.
Awesome. I'm excited.
So, Melissa, where can people learn more about you and reach out to Merkle?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Beyond the Paid, and you can find us online at merkleb2b.com.
And Melissa's a frequent watcher of PPC Town Hall. I know she's also super engaged on the comments. So if you watch any of the live premieres, hey, you have a question, just at Melissa, and I'm sure she'll be there.
Absolutely. John,
how do people find Microsoft and your stuff?
The easiest way to find me is on Twitter. I don't have nearly as cool of a Twitter handle though. John_A_Lee. It's very on the nose. If you have any questions, that's a great place to start, and I can get you introduced into whoever to get your question answered. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, Microsoft advertising is everywhere at this point. So kind of a hard to miss brand.
They are. Are either of you going to be speaking at any upcoming conferences?
I'll be speaking at SMX Advanced.
Okay.
Likewise.
We are doing a roundtable on the new things like Performance Max, our keywords going away, all that fun stuff. It should be a good roundtable.
And John, you're speaking at SMX Advanced as well?
I am actually on this very topic, the Workday consumer. However, the different flavor of that will be, I'll have a co-presenter named Kelly, who will be coming in with a lot of the data and the analytics side of the story, whereas I'm painting the fun word pictures at the front end of it. So, but more on the Workday consumer at SMX Advanced.
Okay. And I'll be speaking on the topic of RSAs with about a month left between that session and when you have to use them, and there's no more ETAs, at least within Google. I think Microsoft, it's end of August or something.
That's correct. Yeah, the 29th of August.
Yeah. So going to keep talking about RSAs and how to optimize them. SMX Advanced, I believe, is actually free this time.
It is.
It's
Yeah,
amazing. Everybody sign up.
exactly. That's a big deal. So go and sign up, and we'll see all three of us. So if you've enjoyed this episode of PPC Town Hall, please subscribe. We'll have new episodes coming soon. I'll also put in the comments what you want to hear more about. We have a post-session survey. We've gotten some feedback in those surveys that people want to be more tactical. Optmyzr does have a separate YouTube series. It's called Learn with Optmyzr. So we'll take some of the concepts that we talk about in these types of sessions, and we'll show you how to actually do those things within the tools that we have. So thank you for watching. Thank you, John. Thank you, Melissa. And we'll see everyone next time.